I want to take a few minutes to talk about a pivot table pro tip that I actually didn't discover until quite recently, and that's how to use pivots to group numerical values. Now, many people are familiar with grouping text fields or dates in pivot tables, but what most users don't realize is that you can also group numerical fields into custom bins or buckets. Now, to do this, what we're going to do in this demo is we're going to pull a numerical field into our row labels like this. In this case, we're looking at the price point per bottle of wine. And this feels a little bit wrong because we're always taught, to pull those numerical fields into the values pane of our field list, not into rows or columns. But in this case, that's exactly what we want. And what we're going to do is right click one of the values in this column and navigate to the group option just like we would with a date or a text field. But the difference is that this dialog box that we get is specific to dealing with values. So we can determine a start value, an end value, and the group or bin size. So in this particular case, we're saying that our wine prices start at $0. We want to extend it to 1,000, and we want to group these prices into $100 bins or buckets. And that spits out something that looks kind of like this. Now, note that instead of showing each individual price point, that's been translated into these groupings. And by pulling in a field like the count of the wine name, that's telling us that there are 48,383 wines in our sample that are priced from $0 to $99. There are 1,282 that are priced from $100 to $199. And then all the way down at the other end of the spectrum, we have 3 unique wines that are priced over $1,000 per bottle. Now, if you wanted to undo and go back to your original unique price points, just right-click those groupings and choose Ungroup to get back where you started. So this type of value grouping is an excellent way to analyze things like the frequency of observations that fall into different buckets. In fact, it's a perfect way to create bins to use as source data for a histogram or Pareto chart, which are designed specifically to visualize distributions. Now, to recap these use cases, again, analyzing the count or frequency of observations that fall into specific groups or bins of values, or creating higher level summary tables or charts from more granular data sources. So let's jump into our pro tip workbook. Let's open up this pivot based on our wine tasting data and practice bundling or grouping these price values. All right, so if you'd like to follow along, open up your pro tip workbook, head to the table of contents, and look for the grouping values demo in the gray pivot table tips section. And go ahead and link straight out to that sheet. And what you'll find here is a basic pivot table layout. It's built on our wine tasting data, and we just have 2 fields in view right now. We've got wine varieties in column A, those are our row labels, and we have the average price per bottle in column B. Those are our values. And this is very standard, a very common type of pivot table layout. You've got a text-based field as row labels. You've got a numerical or quantitative field as values. So from here, we could apply, some text-based groupings. Maybe we want to select everything with Cabernet Sauvignon in the wine type title and create a group containing just those items. That's a very common type of grouping with pivot tables, but we're not going to do that. We're going to take a slightly different approach, and we're actually going to pull our value field into our row labels, and we're going to pull a text field, in this case the wine name, into our values. So we're going to kind of flip the script here to create a totally different view of our data. So to do that, let's pull wine variety out, and we're going to take that price field and pull it straight from values into rows. And when we do that, we now see a unique list of price points listed out row by row. And from here, what we can do is basically say, okay, for each of these price points, for $4 wines, $5 wines, $6 wines, how many observations or rows exist in our data set? And since our data set is at the individual wine level, I can grab this wine name column, pull it into the values, and represent it as a count. So this is telling me there are 7 wines that are priced at $4 a bottle. We have 16 priced at $5, and so on and so forth as we scroll through this table. So This is great. It's already kind of a helpful way to understand the distribution of wine prices in this sample, but it's a little bit overwhelming because I have so many different price points here to try to make sense of. This is a great use case for grouping these prices into bins or buckets. So let's right click, can select any one of these prices, choose group, and here we see this dialog box that's specific to grouping numerical fields. So let's say we want to start our bucket, our first bucket at $0. And in this case, we've got some wines that go all the way up that high, but very, very few. So let's end at 1,000. And the buy option where it says 100, that's the size of each bin. So do we want groups of prices in $10 increments or 100 or 1,000? Let's start with 100 and see what that looks like and simply press OK. So what that does is it's basically converted those individual price points into these bins or buckets. And from here, we've got our counts of wine names. So you can see the vast majority fall under $100. We've got about 1,200, almost 1,300 that fall in the 100 to 200 point range, and so on. So we can treat these values just like anything. We can sort our buckets. We can create a pivot chart based on these frequencies, copy it, paste them into a new sheet, and create a histogram or Pareto chart. But the bottom line is that by using these value grouping tools, we're able to explore and analyze this data set from a totally different angle or through a totally different lens and really get a sense for how these price points are distributed throughout our data set. So there you have it, quick crash course on using PivotTable value grouping tools.